Hello, this is Norman and welcome to Run with Horses. Today I'm joined by my special guest, Chloe and Cameron. These are my kids if you don't know. And they are now officially in college and more or less away from home more than they're at home, but they're at home now. And part of always my goal in doing this show, but also in parenting my kids, is to help you and them be disciples of Jesus. So I want to talk a little bit about how they're getting going in their life as it is now. And then hopefully, while they're here this week, we'll do another show or two with them and talk about some of the things that are coming up in their life and some of the things they're doing. But today, what I want to focus on is kind of where they're at and how they got here and how some of the things they've learned maybe in the past have helped them or not helped them, as the case may be, to get where they are now, if that makes sense. To start with, we'll start with Chloe, and can you give an update, just kind of where you are in life right now?
Well, I've finished my first year of college on campus at Faith Baptist Bible College. So I'm finished my junior year because I did the previous 2 years online. So that was a whole interesting experience. And now I just got back from a 3-week missions trip to Japan. And then now I'm looking forward to my second tour in the States. So I'll be traveling for the next 2 months around Iowa, Kansas, and Wisconsin, doing concerts at churches.
So you're about to start your last year at Faith, and what is your major?
It's biblical studies with an emphasis in biblical counseling.
So really quickly, what are you hoping to do?
I would love to return to Japan as a missionary. So I'm hoping next fall to go to Japan and kind of have an internship there with one of the missionaries for like 9 months. But basically, I'm hoping to use my counseling just in daily life. I don't really want to become like an actual professional counselor. That does not sound interesting to me at all. But it's a very interesting major, and I think it's really useful to have a knowledge of counseling just in everyday life.
And I think counseling and just disciple making in general overlap quite a bit, so I think it is a useful major. All right, so Cameron, just a quick overview. Where are you in life?
I just finished EMT school, so graduated, got my license, and then I'll be at Faith this fall. But I have a missions trip in, I guess, 2 weeks now, where I'll be going to Papua New Guinea for the rest of the summer until school starts. So hopefully I get a better look at medical missions after my first trip last summer and just kind of get a better look at it, I guess. I'm hoping to stay longer than I did last time.
Your last trip was to Bolivia, and it was for 10 days, is that right? And with no medical experience, so you really didn't do anything very much medical. But this time, going as an EMT, have
hopefully
some things potentially at least that you can do and contribute, and a little longer trip too, about five or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So what is your major at Faith?
It'll be the same as Chloe's, whatever she just said. That's what
That makes it simple.
Biblical studies with an emphasis in biblical counseling.
There you go. So kind of as an overview, what are you looking at doing then in the future?
I'm hoping to figure out what I'm going to do.
So your future goal is to figure out what you're going to do in the future?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, winging it. That's what
It's gotten me this far.
Well, it is also true that at you guys' age, you don't need to know everything. And to be honest, when I was even 5 years older than Chloe, maybe 4 years older than Chloe, I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I mean, I thought I did, but I ended up making drastic changes. So that's one thing. It's maybe helpful for you guys, but also helpful for anybody that's in that place in life to recognize that you don't always know what the future holds. You plan based on what you know now. And it's kind of what I've told you guys before and what I tell people on the show. My goal for you, and I think God's goal for all of us, is that we become disciple makers. So God's given you gifts, and you're supposed to contribute to His mission, and God has given you gifts that help other people to grow. Now, some people have big gifts where they're in front of people, and Chloe, with music, that might be something that you do. Long term, a lot of people start out and then it doesn't go very far. Other people have I don't want to say smaller gifts, and they're definitely not less important, but they're focused more on ones and twos. And I think has been most of my life. I feel like I'm much better with, one or two people talking than in a big group. And that's the great thing about a show like this, is it's mostly me in a room talking to myself. So it works great from that perspective. But I have had the need to be able to speak to large groups, and you do, what God calls you to do. But recognize that you have gifts God's given you, and what you're learning right now is kind of a combination of what are my gifts and what are my interests, what am I good at, what do I like, what would I like to be good at. And you're on the early side of that, where I'm kind of on the downhill side. I don't have too many more things that I can get good at if I'm not good at them now. And I can still learn new things, but I'm not going to carry them as far. If I pick up the banjo today, I'm not going to go very far with it compared to if I'd picked it up when I was 20. So you're both at the early side of that, starting as an EMT. You have the potential to go as far as you wanted to and God called you to in medicine. And you could become a doctor. So to recognize you're at the early stages of that and saying, you're still exploring in a lot of ways. What does it mean to be who you are and who God's created you to be? And it's okay not to have all the answers. I still don't have all the answers. That's one of the weird things about our position now, is we've come back to the United States to take care of Grandma, that it is kind of this transition and we don't know what the next step is. And you feel like, well, at 53, I should know what, firmly settled what my life is going to look like and going forward. That's not true. So part of my encouragement to you and to everyone else that's listening that's in that similar place, as you're looking toward the future and it does seem uncertain, that's okay. And I think sometimes God plans it that way because He wants us to learn to trust Him. And that's the main thing, that you pursue Him. It's kind of like what Paul told Timothy, and I share this a lot, but Paul told Timothy, flee youthful lust and pursue righteousness, godliness, all those things. And right now, you're in a good place to pursue. You don't have a lot of hindrances, things that will tie you down and keep you from pursuing whatever direction God led you. So, Cameron, if you want to be a paramedic and work in Africa in a village setting, well, that's easy to do as a single person. Have 3 kids and a wife who don't like living in Africa. It just doesn't happen. So a lot of people, their direction, it's definitely shaped by each relationship that you build and all those things. So it's okay not to know and keep plugging away. Okay, so one of my questions for you guys, because I know we've been part of a very small church in Japan for a long time, and I keep emphasizing like journaling and just being consistent in your Bible study and prayer. So now that you have been on your own for at least a little while, not as long for Cameron, but a little bit longer for Chloe, how do you feel you have been prepared, and how have you done with keeping up with the fundamentals like that, prayer and your time in God's Word, when you do have school and work and all these other things that you're doing?
For me, I know it's gotten a lot harder. Just when you're at home, there's always people like kind of checking up on you, being like, hey, did you read your Bible today? Hey, have you spent time in the Word? Have you been praying? What have you learned recently? There's always people that are asking you questions or sharing what they've been learning. So then it's always like, oh yeah, I need to do that today. So there's much more of a reminder. And then it's really easy when you're in school to just go, I need to do school, and then your mind is only on school and you don't do anything else. And we've discovered this. I don't multitask very well at all. But so being away from home definitely makes it harder for me to remember, oh yeah, I haven't read my Bible today. I need to sit down and carve out some time specifically for that.
Yeah, I would just say probably there's more like distractions, I guess, when you're more on your own. There's more things that you can do that you probably wouldn't normally do if there are a bunch of other people there. Mm-hmm. But it's like, oh, well, I just do this all day, and then you end up not getting much done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's part of where you are in life now that you have to figure out, because up until you left home, Mom and Dad had a lot to do with your encouraging you and reminding you of eat, exercise, but also in your spiritual life. And I think a lot of people struggle with that transition going from I'm at home. I'm part of a youth group. I have all these things that support me in my spiritual life too. I'm out on my own. No one reminded me today. I didn't have a good conversation with anybody about anything spiritual. So it is very much, and I'm talking to different churches and people about this, what I would call, and I think I got it from Jim Putman, who has a book, Real Life Discipleship, a discipleship pathway. You think about going from a spiritual infant to a child to adult. Well, you're in the place physically where you're going to that young adult and you're taking responsibility for yourself. But you have to recognize there's that spiritual component too, that you're responsible for that. And are you putting the things in place that will help you do that? And that's where, I've always used the example with running, because I still run. I'm planning to run an 8-hour event Saturday, which is just stupid. I can't believe I'm doing this. I hate running, but I do it consistently. And how do you do that? Well, by planning ahead and having structure and having the discipline to do the right thing when it's hard. So spiritually, how do you do that? And that's the question that you have to figure out what works for you, because there's not somebody else there. And unfortunately, it would be great if every church had really good dynamics where there were lots of people that come alongside you and just really good relationships right away. But you go to a new church, it takes you a while to build those relationships. They may be there, but it takes you a while to build them. So how do you do what's best for you, which is, I don't want to be careful and say, I don't care about your homework, but your grades don't matter in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but your spiritual life does. So put the first things first. How do you help yourself do that? Okay, so what are you learning then? So you're on summer break. What has God been teaching you in the last year? We'll go back to Chloe.
Yeah, I feel like there's been so much change. It's been hard to settle down and go this is what God has been teaching me, because it's just been so crazy. There's not been a lot of time to just sit and think, okay, what do I need to do? And that's probably something I need to do, is kind of sit down and go, okay, what is my life going to look like if I continue living like this? And, but really, I think the biggest thing is that God doesn't change. Even though my life is chaotic and crazy, and I sometimes forget, I haven't read my Bible in, a couple days because I've been so busy with something else and just haven't thought about it. But to come back to the Bible and realize, it's always the same. No matter what crazy stuff is going on in my life, He doesn't change. He's always there for me. And when I get my head on straight and I come back to Him, He's ready. He's waiting for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for our life as missionaries, and then since before you were born, for your mom and I, it's always been kind of chaotic like that. You have transitioning from one place to another. It seems like your life's one long transition, and you just kind of are temporarily in one place long enough to sort of settle in. And then even if you're in the same town, we moved probably over 30 times now. So it is difficult for a lot of people to figure that out. But I think the more you're focused on pursuing Christ-likeness yourself and using your gifts on His mission, then the easier it is, because that's part of His mission, is growing you. So you recognize that, how you make money, it's a question, but it's not the most important question. And if you're really looking at how do I use my gifts for God's glory and as part of His mission, then that time in God's Word is definitely a much higher priority. You recognize that this is part of how I answer that question. If I'm not there, then I'm not going to see that answer. And I think for me, and I know for Mom too, that's been part of what has helped us handle chaos and weird transitions and all these different moves around the country and around the world, is God's the same. So as much as possible, we try to start with Him, and that He's the consistent in all this. And everything else can be chaotic, but as long as this part of my life is settled, then you can handle the chaos.
I definitely think God has been showing me like where my priorities are. And it's not always him, and that is shown in my life. So kind of, it's always a reminder to think, oh, how much time have I spent, with God compared to how much time I've spent, on my phone or reading books or even doing schoolwork. Not that that's bad, but in comparison, like my time with God has been not as much. So going, okay, where are my priorities right now? Because when you look at how much time you spend on things, that's what shows you where your priorities are. And
Yeah, it's hard to not let other things compete with time with God. You say, well, school is important. It is, but it does not compete with God. They're not at the same level. And that's the same thing when you get to the point of work. I think you'll be happiest if you recognize that work doesn't compete with God. I know one of the things that I heard when I was still in college, a guy challenged us as a college class that when you go looking for a job, you first make sure there's a church there that you're supposed to be part of. Because if there's not, that job's not for you, because the job does not compete with God, and you don't fit God in around your job. You pursue God and put him first, and the details work out. You put God second or third, and they often don't work out because your priorities are wrong, and they just can't work out. But then you can't see it either. I think you're blinded to that when your priorities are wrong. So to keep your priorities right and don't let other things compete with God is really huge. So, all right, Cameron, so what are you learning these days?
Yeah, I feel like just being in this time of life is when you're really pushed to you learn, grow. That's kind of the whole point of going to school. So you're trying to learn and change and be better at different things. But so then kind of how you fit in being satisfied with God and finding that satisfaction in him when you're purposely trying to change and enhance your skills, different things like that. So I don't know, I've been really struggling with how that all works, how you can be, and because there's a point where you don't want to be satisfied with who you are now, but you do want to be satisfied with who God is, I guess. So it's finding that kind of balance and how that works.
Well, in some of it, I think it'd be worth going back and looking. I can't remember where it is in Psalms where David talks about, God, you were the one that strengthened my hands for the bow, and that God's the one that trained him for war. It's like, well, David trained for war. He studied fighting. He trained. He studied his instruments. He was a musician too. So those are not competing things. I think that's one thing that we struggle with sometimes, is that God gave us the gift. He also works with us as we grow and change in our ability to use those gifts. So it's not just trusting God, he gave me the gift, now I need to use it, but God also works with us as we figure out how we use that and to what level are we able to use that. So to make sure that he's part of the equation even as we're going forward like that. And I think that's harder for us because sometimes we say, well, God gave me the gift, now I got to work it out. I got to just study hard, or I have to train. Some people that do really physical activities, say a professional athlete or even a musician, and guys both play. There's a temptation to say, well, God gave me the gift, so now I just need to practice and perfect it. It's like, well, no. God's part of that too. And I would say that if we begin to put our effort above our trust in God, and we begin to try to work it out ourselves, then that's when we get off the path. Because whatever level of achievement you might reach, whether it's in medicine or in music or any other endeavor, if you reach that without God at the top, then you failed. And I would say, I've known quite a few people that have done exceptionally well from the world's perspective in their chosen field, but along the way, they've gotten so far from God that it doesn't matter. I would say they've completely ceased to have any real value in what they do anymore. I would much prefer that you guys settle for a lower level of skill with God at the top. And I think then God can help you get to the place you need to when it's directed toward him. And I think that's important, to not let that be a fight between my part and God's part, and I have to do this, or I've got to figure out these things and change. God needs to be the one that's in charge of changing us as we pursue Him. But that can be difficult. So in the last year, you both have learned and are learning quite a few things. Do you see how have your relationships with other people changed in the last, for a couple of years, maybe for Chloe and a year for Cameron? Because I know it's been somewhat traumatic for all of us coming back to the States from Japan and then going to college, and you go from a little bit sheltered to less sheltered. I'd say still in a Bible college setting, you're still sheltered in some ways, but Cameron hasn't been there yet, so he's more, the MT is probably less sheltered. But how have your relationships changed, and how have you seen God working in your relationships in the last year or so?
It's definitely, the number of relationships has exploded. And then you realize, there's a lot of different kinds. Like this one's a really good friend. We talk a lot. There's like an acquaintance where maybe there's something in between a friend and acquaintance. Or like, I know you, I talk to you, but it's like situational. I talk to you because we both go to the same class, because we always run into each other at this one place. So then we're friends, but we don't hang out outside of that. So are we, figuring out, is this a friend? Is this what is this? I found out that I'm not very good at relationships in some ways. I'm good at talking to people, but I'm not good at building relationships and intentionally putting effort into them so that it's not just, this is somebody I hang out with and we talk about and it stays surface level. Learning how to make that go deeper and say, okay, no, we actually talk about things that matter. It's been something that I've been kind of struggling with, like how to do that.
I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But figuring out how to put God into the equation too. Because a lot of times it's easy to just, you meet somebody and then you just talk about your day. Mm-hmm. And just like, did you hear about this person? Or, you have fun together, but it never goes any further than that. Mm-hmm. So how you get past the point of just surface level conversations.
And your mom and I are both in several circles known as the serious friends. So I know Susan has had one of her friends say, you're the serious friend. Every time we get together, we have like real conversations. And I've had one of my friends, his wife told Susan, normally my husband's with his friends and there's just like these crazy conversations and there's nothing important. But when it's with Norman, they have like these real conversations about something that means something. It's like, both of us have tried to be, and I think the word is intentional. I don't think you use that, but to be intentional in the conversations and bring in God to that. And I don't know the way Mom does it, but the way that I typically do it is I have all the things that I'm learning and thinking about, and a lot of times I'll just ask the people I'm with about whatever it is that I'm learning and studying. Hey, have you thought about this? What do you think about this? Sometimes, I recognize the person I'm with is not in that same ballpark, so I'll adjust it more. But because I keep reading things that are, I would say, more important, or I'm more intentional in my reading choices, then I have things that I'm thinking about. And I think the choices, ultimately all of life's going to come down to choices, right? The ability to have good conversations is going to start with some of the choices we make to be in God's Word and be growing, because then some of those things are on our mind, but then also the other choices we make to read things that are important, that matter. So, I don't read a lot of fiction anymore. I do a little bit, but it doesn't compare to the other things that I read. So, and I read things that I don't always agree with, which is, I found that's a great way to come up with things to ask people about. So, hey, I read this. What do you think about this? And I know that we probably either don't agree on this, or that neither one of us agree with this, but it sparks a conversation about why is this wrong? Or what is the problem with this issue? So reading things like that, sometimes it's really interesting because I read it and go, that's crazy, I can't believe somebody thinks that. But then it gives an opportunity for having those good conversations too.
I think one thing that I've realized just since finishing my junior year is, I think I was thinking about how you always say to be intentional. And it just kind of hit me. I'm like, oh, I have to be intentional. Because I've always been, in conversations with you or with Mom, and you guys are intentional. So then conversations just happen. They feel like they just happen because I'm not the one doing it. So I'm just like, oh, that'll just happen with my other relationships too, and it doesn't. And then I'm like, well, why is that? And it just hit me, like, after school was over, I'm like, oh, I have to start those. So that was like a kind of a big moment for me, just coming out. I don't remember if it was in Japan and I was thinking through it, or when it was, when I'm like, oh, I have to start the conversation. I have to go out of my way, sort of, to talk to this person and say, hey, do you want to meet, once a week for coffee, or just to talk, just to hang out? Because you can't get to know someone at a deeper level when you're in a group, really. So figuring out finally that, oh, that's my job was kind of like an aha moment.
Yes, that's what intentional means in this context. Well, that's hard for a lot of people. You go through earlier life, and some people don't learn that for years when they become adults and married and have kids, and they have never learned to be intentional in their relationships, and in most of them. But you realize that a lot of the good relationships that you want to have are there to have if you're willing to be intentional to start it. And that means, hey, that seems like a cool person to get to know. What happens? Nothing. Unless you go up and say, hey, let's have coffee sometime. And most people will go, sure. Most people are flattered that somebody wants to get together with them. It's very rare that you'll have somebody go like, I don't think so. I've never had that happen. There probably are contexts where you should be able to tell some people like, oh, that's probably not somebody I'm going to be able to get together with. Somebody either so far out of my, league, like the President of the United States, if he walks by, I'm probably not going to be able to ask him to have coffee with me. Not going to happen, right? But most people, if you're in a group, it really is that simple. It's like, hey, let's get together sometime. Let's have coffee. Let's have a meal. That's what intentionality means when it comes to the relationship, is to be the one that puts something out there that the other person can respond to. Maybe they can come up with a better offer. You can say, hey, let's have coffee. They say, hey, let's have supper. Why don't you come to our house? Awesome. That works too. But if you don't initiate that, most people seem to struggle with that. I mean, not everybody. There are people who are natural at that, and they're just always getting together and doing stuff. Hey, let's do this party. But then they get together and no intentional conversations happen. So there's that too. Just because you go to make the first move and you have a group of people get together at your house, doesn't mean that this group of 3 really smart people who have great opinions and thoughts about how to grow are going to be able to help each other to grow. Okay, so Cameron, what have you seen in your life, kind of as you've got out away from home and you're figuring out what life is like in relationships with people? Because I know you always feel like you're not super social. I'm not sure why you feel that way. You always do fine, but.
And it's kind of like what we were talking about before, where I feel like, when in our family we talk about things like this, and it's like, oh yeah, you should have intentional conversations with people. And so I was like, oh yeah, great, we just need to have, so I learned that sort of thing. We need to have intentional conversations. I heard it a million times. I know that backwards and forwards, but then it's always kind of like, well, I don't really know anybody, I don't go out, so there's I don't have a lot of opportunity for that, unless I didn't. So then now it's like, oh wait, I actually have an opportunity. So it's like, wait, now what was that stuff I was supposed to have learned before? And then it makes it more real, because before you're learning stuff and you're kind of they're like, okay, yeah, and you put in some categories I can't really use this now. Where now kind of I feel like we're more to the point where it's like, okay, you're actually supposed to be using this stuff you said you learned before. So then there's more, the opportunities are now there. So I have to start actually trying to do the stuff that I know.
Yeah, well that is, and that's the difference between going from a spiritual child to a spiritual adult, is you're learning a lot of stuff early in your spiritual life, and some of it you can apply. Other things, you're limited in how you can apply it because your context is determined by other people. But now that you're adults, you have the ability to determine more of what happens in more of your relationships. So it is a time of taking, I'd say the key word, going from a spiritual child to a spiritual young adult, is responsibility. It's kind of the same for you guys. What makes it different you living at home than living on your own? Well, the degree of responsibility that you have for yourself. You have to intentionally take responsibility to do some things, or they do not happen. Because no one is going to look at your room and go, you need to clean that up. You have to do it. I mean, as a young adult, and you have a car, you know what? If you don't put gas in it, it runs out, and then it doesn't work anymore. You have to take responsibility for that. Where at home, somebody else is making sure that there's food on the table. Like, well, we've always kind of eaten pretty much at the same time. Well, a lot of young adults kind of eat random times, and they go to bed at random times, and they get up at random times. Why is that? They haven't really taken responsibility for that aspect of their life. It's kind of like, well, I'll get up sometime. Well, yes, that's one way to do it. But you have to apply that intentionality and accept the responsibility then in all your life. And it does apply to the relationships like that. You've heard and seen some of how that works, but then you have to kind of experiment. And I think that's one of the neat things I think about college. It is kind of a safe place to just try. If you offend somebody, hey, you're not going to see them in a few years anyway. So it's not like somebody that you're in your office mate and you're going to be working with them for the next 20 years. You have a chance to experiment with how do you build relationships? How do you relate to people? And you can try things. And what most people find is like, well, they're hesitant to do some things, but they find out when they try it, they can do it. So, I could never speak in public. When they do it, oh yeah, I guess I can do that. I could never lead a group, but then they have to lead one. Oh yeah, I guess I can do that. And most things you'll find that the fear that you can't do it or that you'll fail miserably is what keeps you from doing it. Period. That's what keeps you from doing it. It's the fear of it, not the actual that you can't or don't have the ability. It's that you're afraid to try. And a lot of those things are skills. So there are conversation skills. There are relationship building skills. There are books about this kind of stuff. There are people that don't learn it until much later in life. But if you recognize now that you can accept intentionality, you can accept responsibility and be intentional in your relationships, it will help you go forward. And just try. I mean, there was not sure what that was. I think it was a comedian that I heard in college, and he was talking about some of the relationships and the difficulty that we have at that time in our life, say from 15 to 25. People are figuring out who I am and how do I relate to other people and all these kind of things. And there were these two guys talking, and one of them, and this is the comedian was telling the story, one of them was saying, I'd really like to ask out this girl. So hey, just ask her out. The worst she can say is no. And he goes, yeah, you're right. So he went over to her and he started talking to her, and she said, get out of my face, you loser. He said, wait a minute, you broke the rules there. But in reality, that's not the way. I mean, as a comedian, he's expressing the worst fears that people have. That's not usually the way it works. And even if that was a true story, the guy walks away and it didn't have anything to do with him. It says much more about that girl, and probably made him say, I'm really glad I didn't go with her, because she's a jerk. She's not the person I thought she was. To try, to be the first one to put yourself out there. It feels risky, but everyone feels that way. And I think that's part of what we don't see at that time of life, because we're so focused on ourselves. It's hard then to realize that other people feel the same way. And other people often wish they had better relationships and knew how to do it, and they don't. And they haven't been taught, they haven't been encouraged to do it. But so you have, so you can be that change agent in your circle of friends who, hey, we can talk about things that actually matter. We don't all have to tell stupid jokes and waste time with things that don't help us in any way become more like Christ or don't contribute to the world at all. We can do things that matter. We can have conversations that matter. And you can be the one that brings that in. And I think a lot of people would welcome that. I was thinking about something else, and I think I almost lost it there. But it does come back to your choices. That's a big part of life where you're at now. The choices you make you're building a foundation for what kind of person you're going to be. And if you realize now you can take some risk now, and there's not a huge penalty for trying with building relationships, those things, and you find out that's part of what helps you find out who you are and who you're supposed to be. So, okay, Cameron, I wanted to ask you, because you're getting ready to go to Papua New Guinea, as you think about that trip, how do you have concerns or fears or worries about that? Or are you just like, just play it by ear?
Yeah, don't usually worry about the actual doing it part. It's more like I want to go and be able to kind of get better idea of the medical missions, be able to use the medical stuff. And I guess since it's so much up to the missionary, I don't know what I'll actually end up doing. So I guess the only fear is maybe I'll just do something entirely different, which it's not bad, but I just imagine, coming back and be like, so how was your, medical missions? Well, I, cleaned toilets most of the time, but it was good, So it's just kind of, I don't know. I don't know what I'll be doing, and I just have to accept that God will work through it and that it'll be helpful no matter what happens, kind of.
I think that's the right attitude. And what I always tell people who are thinking about missions and thinking about coming to Japan, it's the best thing, to the extent that you can, to not have expectations is the best, because you don't have any control over it. It's one thing if you're in charge. Okay, now you need to be intentional, and you can't do that. You show up and go they don't tell me what to do. I have no ability to do anything. So to not have the expectations, but to be ready and willing to do whatever is needed, and to come with humility and that heart to serve. So there's a story of a guy that was in the Salvation Army, and I wish I could remember his name. He's in one of our summer books that we went through with our summer program. But he had joined the Salvation Army to do these great things, and the first thing they asked him to do was to shine other people's boots. So he spent all day shining boots for these other people who were in the Salvation Army back years and years ago, and they were often really muddy and dirty. It's a terrible, it's a hard job. And in the first, as he was doing that, he was really upset. I can't believe I'm stuck here in this basement. This is a worthless job. But as he got to thinking about it, he said, well, this says a lot. Somebody has to do this. And if this is what God has for me, then I want to do it as well as I can for His glory. So he spent the time praying for each person. Then as he shined their boots, he said, I'm going to be intentional about using this time. So I'm praying for this person, I'm shining their boots. I don't know where they're going to go, but I'm going to pray that, God really uses them. And God eventually used this guy. He got out of the basement, shining the shoes, but he had to, I think God used that experience to help him change his heart. And that became a big part of who he was. To recognize that, and this is kind of what I was forgetting before that I wanted to tell you guys, that a lot of people understand and really believe that if, to the extent that you really learn to serve other people, you will find the joy and happiness that comes in walking with Christ. It's Jesus gave the example, and you see that in Philippians 2, where he was humble, but he's humble to obedience to the cross. He's humble to serve other people. He didn't do that for himself. There wasn't anything that he got out of that. But he was a model for us of what it means to love other people, to be willing to sacrifice, to be willing to serve. And a lot of times what we see, and I think it's true at any age, but I think it's even more true for teenagers and young adults, we have a tendency to overthink the details of our life. And you get in this kind of spiral and you're just thinking about yourself. And one thing that serving does is get you out of that. And that's never healthy at any age. And I think a lot of people that struggle with depression and discouragement, they're thinking about themselves. But when we think about God and think about the people around us that God loves, that Christ died for, and we say, how can I serve these people that Christ died for? Well, then you're not worried about yourself so much. It's God, what I've tried to do is say, God, I entrust you to take care of me. So how can I help other people? And, sometimes it almost seems like, well, maybe we went overboard with that. There's times when maybe we've been too generous giving money. Well, that put us in a bad place because we helped people maybe that we couldn't quite afford to help. But I've never regretted it, even though it might have meant we had a few hard weeks or months, or physically, say I'm going to show up to help somebody do something that's really beyond my capabilities. It's like, well, that wasn't the most fun in the world, but I did it for the right reason, and the other person was encouraged or blessed or helped by it. And I've never regretted that. Sometimes in the moment I've regretted some of the physical things, but I think that's one of the things that you have to figure out and work out in your life now is, what does it mean to take who you are and your gifts and your personality, because you're both unique. Every person is unique. How has God created you in such a way that you really contribute to His church family being what it's supposed to be? And I think to a large extent that's being intentional about looking outward. And where we have I think a human tendency is to look inward. And that's just an odd thing. I remember hearing about this even in college, and a word I've shared with you guys before, and I can't remember if I've shared it on the show before, but I learned this really long word. It's called omphaloskepsis, and it means gazing at your belly button. It's navel gazing, and it's this just self-reflection to an extreme. And I think that's a human tendency. It's a destructive one, because when we're doing that, we're not looking at God. And, if you're looking at yourself, you don't see God or other people. When you're looking at other people, hopefully you see God and other people. When you're looking at God, hopefully you see God and other people. But I think you miss both of them when we're focused on ourselves. So that's one of the things that as you're going forward, that I'm hoping that you learn that lesson. It's like you may succeed or fail in your career or in physical skills, but if you succeed as a disciple maker, it'd be because you keep your eyes on God and you see other people, and you look for opportunities to serve them, and don't stop too long to question what it cost you. Because I know it cost Jesus a lot to save me. So I don't question what it cost me to be part of His mission. And that's why we are in a warehouse. It's echoey. Probably people can recognize that because it's not our choice necessarily, but it's where God has us right now. So I think that's a great lesson. So, okay, Chloe, go back to you. You're getting ready for your last year at school. Well, I guess we'll go back before that. You're getting ready for your second tour. You've already had one concert this summer, 3 concerts this summer. How are you thinking about the rest of your summer? Do you have, how many more do you have scheduled right now?
I was looking at the schedule this morning, and currently there are a total of 10. So 8 more.
7 more.
7 more.
Math.
I don't do math. Anybody who knows me knows I do not do math. 7 more. So I have 7 more. And there's still a couple more people that I'll be contacting about concerts. But yeah, 7 more.
So as you do the concerts, what is that like? As you travel and you meet people, what is that experience like?
It depends a lot on the church that I'm visiting. Usually it's a church. I've done a few where it's somebody's house or something, but usually it's in relation to a church in some way. A lot of times it's really cool because you get to meet a lot of different people. Sometimes it can be a little bit awkward because it's like, well, not all these people really know me. Like, I'm just kind of showing up and being like, hey, I sing. But I always enjoy the actual singing when I get to share what I've been learning, because all throughout the songs, particularly for this year, I have like an actual theme. So I'm sharing, okay, this is how these songs fit into this theme. This is what, God has been teaching me. This is what God was teaching me when I wrote the song. And it's really enjoyable. And it's always fun to have people come up to me afterward and say, hey, I really enjoyed this song, and it really spoke to me because of this or that circumstance in my life right now. And just knowing that God can use me through my music is really just an encouragement to me as well.
So in general, you have had good responses to your concerts?
Yeah. People that don't like it don't talk to me, so.
There's that. Yeah, that's true. So have you thought very much about past this year of school? Because Cameron still has 2 years of school, so he has lots of time to think about what comes next. And until he gets back from Papua New Guinea, won't know what he learned from that experience. But you've been doing music for a while, and you've been in college for a while. So your next steps after school, what are you thinking?
Well, I sort of mentioned this before, but I'm planning after this next year of school, I technically still have an extra semester, so I'll do that semester online, hopefully from Japan during this internship that I'll be doing there for 9 months. And the reason that I want to do the internship, probably not an official internship, but just going to help out a missionary there. The reason I want to go is because I have grown up in Japan and it's really familiar to me. So I need to know if I want to return to Japan just because it's home or because I'm actually called as a missionary. And I think those are two separate things, because I could live in Japan as a normal person, or I could...
I'm not sure you could live anywhere as a normal person.
Okay, but like as a non-missionary, just someone who goes to a church, and I think I would be content with that. But I know we need more missionaries, so I'm open to the idea of going as a vocational missionary. So kind of going to see, this is an area of Japan that I have not been in, that I've never lived in before. This is a missionary that I've never worked with before. I don't know them at all. So there's nothing familiar about this area of Japan. To really see, can I do the work of a missionary? Can I really do this, or am I better suited to work on music primarily and go back and forth between Japan and America, or maybe not return to Japan? It's just, I don't really know. So this is kind of a test, I suppose, though I don't really like wording it that way.
Well, it's gaining new experiences and information that will help you make that decision on the road. So you have another 2 years or so before you really have to make that decision, or although a lot of people have interim things too. So
I suppose it's sort of like a really long vision trip.
Yeah. Is that how you see your trip to Papua New Guinea? Would it be a vision trip?
I suppose you could word it like that.
Except you're not thinking of going specifically to Papua New Guinea at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you done any research on places where medical missions is a big part of ministry?
Not really.
Because I've heard a few different places, but I don't really know very much about where it's a huge part. Because I know you went with a different organization last time, and they have several different countries that they go to. And then AVW has a few different countries where they have official clinics and hospitals and things where medical missions is a big part of ministry. So I know it is a big thing in a lot of places, but I don't really know where all that is really a big thing. That'd be something to be worth pursuing, although I know Papua New Guinea has had a long history, and it's done really well with using medical missions to see the gospel go forward and churches start. I think it's kind of neat how they work together with the Bible college there. So this will be your first fall, Cameron, on campus. Are you looking forward to being on campus at Faith Baptist Bible College?
Yeah, it'll seem like a big sigh of relief, I think, after kind of the crazy last semester. So I'm looking forward to being in one place for a lot longer time. And yeah.
So what was the hardest thing about the spring?
I mean, a lot of it was me trying to figure out how to do the amount of stuff I had to do on my own, figure out stuff, go different places, and also just learning EMT stuff I feel like was stressful for me at least, especially toward the beginning, because they really lay down the seriousness of everything you're learning from the very beginning when you haven't actually learned anything yet. So you kind of feel the expectation, people are going to die if you don't know what to do, but you don't actually know what to do. So that got a lot better as the semester progressed, but particularly toward the beginning when I was first starting to try to figure things out and had all the pressure, it was a little crazy.
Yeah, I knew it was hard too, because you were first time away from home and still had had a new job and new place to live and new school, so it was quite a lot all at once. So Faith will be a little bit different because you do know at least quite a few students who are there, just because Chloe's gone, so it's not like you don't know anybody. And then Chloe and Melody will both be there, so you know them. And you've been on campus before, so you're at least somewhat familiar with the layout, and you know some of the professors at least by sight, and so it's not quite as totally new, and it's not quite as pressure driven as the EMT. Nobody's going to die if you fail one of your classes at Faith. We hope not. Anyway, you'll have really messed it up. Yeah, I can't imagine how you could do that. All right, so let's change gears a little bit. So we've been back in the States for a year and a half, is that right? Actually, just about a year for you two. So how have you adjusted to being in the States?
I think the first, I don't know, the summer, because we came in like June, May, one of those, and pretty much jumped right into a tour. So Cameron and I were traveling around and just trying to figure out, I was terrified of going into convenience stores. I think I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but terrified of going, not just convenience stores, any store. I just didn't want to go, particularly by myself. I just hated it. Even if I was with other people, like we would stop in the car, park, and I just like, I don't want to go in. Like just little stuff like that just made life here so much more difficult because I wasn't used to it. And I think the only thing that fixes that is time. You just have to go into a store because you're like, I'm hungry, I need food, or, So just getting used to how things work here just took time. Mm-hmm. So I think even by the time that I got to Faith, I was more or less adjusted, and then just continued to get more so as I stayed in one place and then went to the same church every week and went to the same stores, and you just get used to it. You're like, oh, this is just the way life is here. And so then it got a lot easier.
Yep. And then Cameron?
I have just always kind of felt that the country doesn't matter to me as much. It was like, I didn't have to do a lot in Japan, and I've had to do a whole lot more once I came to the States. I feel like that's the biggest difference. It's not so much like, oh, America versus Japan, but more like, oh, now I have to, just from this address, drive to the state capital and go to some hospital I've never been to before, and meet people I've never been to before, and do things I've never done before, kind of thing. I feel like that's more of the biggest change that I've had.
Yeah, particularly last semester when you're starting your EMT training in a new city and a bigger city than anywhere we've ever lived. So yeah, that added quite a bit of stress. But you made it through it. What's the number one lesson you learned?
And it was not something that I kind of suspected before I even started, which I thought would probably be good once I had started. But I do a lot better in some ways under pressure, even. Where it's kind of weird. Like I don't know. I've been calling it crunch time just because. But whenever the stakes are higher, then I perform better or tend to.
Why is that?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's like we would be doing practice in EMT school, and they were like, okay, we're doing this like scenario, and then your instructors are sitting there supposedly being the patient, but they're like, I'm screaming in pain right now. And it's like, no, you're not. And it was really hard to get into that, I guess. So then I didn't do very well in those scenarios. But then we had like special lab day where you go to a whole different place in the state capital, your instructors are not anyone you met before, and they run more realistic scenarios, and then I did really well, I think, in that. But it's just, I don't know, you feel more real, and you feel like, oh, you have to get this right, I guess. But I don't know, for some reason, I can just do better.
Well, it seems like if you can do well under pressure, that's a good skill for an EMT to have. It would be bad if you panicked. I would not want my EMT to arrive on the scene when I had a car wreck and be screaming, I don't know what to do. That would be bad.
It doesn't really inspire confidence.
No, it does not.
In some ways, I almost feel like it's if I know what I'm supposed to do, then I can do better. If I really have no idea what to do, then I can start to panic a little more. But, it's like, it kind of seems like the general way things have gone is something happens, and so you become super sharp, like, okay, what's going on? We need to figure this out. And then you realize, oh, I have no idea what's going on, I can't do anything. Then I start crying or something like that. So.
Well, the more you do it, the more you'll learn in that environment. And that's true in any context. It's always kind of scary coming into a new environment, whether it's a new school or a new job or a new country. But the more you're there, the more you figure out this is not just this new environment, but this is me in this new environment. And you gain confidence as you go forward. So, well, I will say publicly, on air, I'm really proud of you guys, doing a good job. Keep on pursuing Christ. Figure out how to do the daily things well. That's ultimately, I think, how we do the long-term well, is to recognize that today's little choices add up to a life that's lived well. So how do you stay consistent in the little things today that are going to help you be the person that God wants you to be? And then it'll work out in the end. So thanks for joining us today. It's great to be joined by Chloe and Cameron. Probably we're going to have them again before they split up and go their own way. But just take some time, pray for your church members, and whatever you do, don't stop running.